King O'Toole and his goose. By Gor, I thought all the world far and near heard of King O'Toole. Well, well, but the darkness of mankind is untellable. Well, sir, you must know, as you didn't hear it afore, that there was a king called King O'Toole, who was a fine old king in the old ancient times, long ago. And it was him that owned the churches in the early days. The king, you see, was the right sort. He was the rail boy, and loved sport as he loved his life, and hunting in particular. And from the rising of the sun up he got, and away he went over the mountains beyond after the deer and the fine times them wore. Well, it was all mighty good as long as the king had his health, but you see, in course of time the king grew old. By raison he was stiff in his limbs, and when he got stricken in years his heart failed him, and he was lost entirely for want of diversion, because he couldn't go a-hunting no longer. And by dad, the poor king was obliged at last to get a goose to divert him. Oh, you may laugh if you like, but it's truth I'm a-telling you, and by way the goose diverted him was this-a-way. You see, the goose used for to swim across the lake, and go diving for trout, and catch fish on Friday night for the king, and flew every other day round about the lake, diverting the poor king. All went on a mighty well, until, by dad, the goose was so stricken in years like his master that he couldn't divert him no longer, and then it was that the poor king was lost complete. The king was walking one morning by the edge of the lake, lamenting his cruel fate, and thinking of drowning himself that could get no diversion in life, and when all of a sudden, turning around the corner beyond, who should he meet but a mighty decent young man coming up to him. "God save you," says the king to the poor man. "God save you kindly, King O'Toole," says the young man. "Through for you," says the king. "I am King O'Toole," says he, "prince and plennypennytinchery of these parts," says he. "But how came you to know that?" says he. "Oh, never mind," says St. Kavin. You see, it was St. Kavin, sure enough, the saint himself in disguise, and nobody else. "Oh, never mind," says he, "I know more than that. May I make bold to ax how is your goose, King O'Toole?" says he. "Blur and eggers, how came you to know about my goose?" says the king. "Oh, never mind," says St. Kavin. You see, it was St. Kavin, sure enough, the saint himself in disguise, and nobody else. "Oh, no matter, I was given to understand it," says St. Kavin. After some more talk, the king says, "What are you?" "I'm an honest man," says St. Kavin. "Well, honest man," says the king, "and how is it you make your money so aisy?" "By making old things as good as new," says St. Kavin. "Is it a tinker you are?" says the king. "No," says the saint, "I'm no tinker by trade, King O'Toole. I've a better trade than a tinker," says he. "What would you say," says he, "if I made your old goose as good as new?" My dear, at the word o' making his goose as good as new, you'd think the poor old king's eyes was ready to jump out of his head. With that the king whistled, and down came the poor goose, all as one as a hound, waddling up to the poor cripple, her master, and as like him as two peas. The minute the saint clapped his eyes on the goose, "I'll do the job for you," he says, "King O'Toole." "By Jaminy," says King O'Toole, "if you do, but I'll say you're the cleverest fellow in the 7 parishes." "Oh, by dad," says St. Kavin, "you must say more nor that. My home's not so soft all out," says he, "as to repair your old goose for nothing. What'll you give me if I do the job for you? That's the chat," says St. Kavin. "I'll give you whatever you ax," says the king. "Isn't that fair?" "Divil a fairer," says the king. "That's the way to do business. This is the bargain I'll make with you, King O'Toole. Will you give me all the ground the goose flies over, the first offer after I make her as good as new?" "I will," says the king. "You won't go back on your word," says St. Kavin. "Honor bright," said King O'Toole, holding out his fist. "Honor bright," says St. Kavin back again. "It's a bargain. Come here," he says to the poor old goose. "Come here, you unfortunate old cripple, and it's I that'll make you the sportin' bird." With that, my dear, he took up the goose by the two wings. "Christen my cross on you," he says, marking her to grace with the blessed sign at the same moment, and throwing her up in the air. "Phew," says he, just giving her a blast to help her. And with that, my jewel, she took to her heels, flying like one of the angels themselves, cutting as many capers as a swallow before a shower of rain. Well, my dear, it was a beautiful sight to see the king standing with his mouth open, looking at his poor old goose flying as light as a lark, and better nor ever she was. And when she lit at his foot, patted her on the head, and said, "Ma Vardine," says he, "for you are the darlint of the world." "And what do you say to me," says St. Kavin, "for making her the like?" "By gor," says the king, "I say nothing bates the art a man barring the bees." "And do ye say no more nor that?" says St. Kavin. "In that I'm beholden to you," says the king. "But will you give me all the ground the goose flew over?" says St. Kavin. "I will," says King O'Toole, "and you're welcome to it," says he, "though it's the last acre I have to give." "But you'll keep your word through?" says the saint. "As through as the sun," says the king. "It's well for you, King O'Toole, that you said that word," says he, "for if you didn't say that word, the devil receive the bit of your goose if ever fly again." When the king was as good as his word, St. Kavin was pleased with him, and then it was he made himself known to the king. "And," says he, "King O'Toole, you're a decent man, for I only come here to try you. You don't know me," says he, "because I'm disguised." "Then who are you?" says the king. "I'm St. Kavin," said the saint, blessing himself. "Oh, Queen of Heaven," says the king, making the sign of the cross before his eyes, and falling down on his knees before the saint. "Is it the great St. Kavin," says he, "that I've been discoursing all this time without knowing it? All as one as if he were a lump of a gossoon. And so you're a saint?" says the king. "I am," says St. Kavin. "By gor, I thought I was only talking to a decent boy," says the king. "Well, you know the difference now," said the saint. "I'm St. Kavin," says he, "the greatest of all the saints." And so the king had his goose as good as new to divert him as long as he lived, and the saint supported him after he come to his property, as I told you, until the day of his death, and that was soon after, for the poor goose thought he was catching a trout one Friday, but, my jewel, it was a mistake he made, and instead of a trout, it was a thieving horse eel, and, by gor, instead of the goose killing the trout for the king's supper, by dad the eel killed the king's goose, and small blame to him, but he didn't ate her, because he darn't ate what St. Kavin laid his blessed hands on.